Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold viewport of his salvage ship, the Wanderer, as it drifted through the debris field that had once been the merchant vessel Celestial Dawn. The twisted metal fragments caught the light from the nearby star system, creating an almost beautiful display of destruction that belied the tragedy that had occurred here just 6 hours ago. "Pirates," muttered his AI companion, Aria, her synthetic voice carrying a note of disgust that Jake had programmed into her emotional subroutines. "The energy signatures match those Vaxari raiders we've been tracking." Jake's jaw tightened. The Vaxari were notorious throughout the Outer Rim territories for their brutal attacks on civilian ships. They took what they wanted and left no survivors, usually. But today, Jake's deep space sensors had picked up something unusual. 3 faint life signs buried deep within the wreckage. "Aria, can you get a better lock on those biosignatures?" "Scanning now, Jake." "They appear to be young, very young, and definitely not human." The AI paused, processing data. "Their life signs are weak but stable. They're in some kind of emergency shelter, but power levels are dropping fast." Jake was already moving toward his equipment locker, pulling on his environmental suit with practiced efficiency. As one of the few independent salvage operators willing to work the dangerous sectors beyond the Federation border, he'd learned to make quick decisions. But this wasn't about salvage or profit. 3 young beings were dying out there, and Jake Morrison had never been able to walk away from someone in need. "Prep the rescue pod area. I'm going in." "Jake, I should point out that rescuing alien children from a known pirate attack zone carries significant risk. The Vaxari could return at any moment." "Then we'd better be quick about it." The rescue pod detached from the Wanderer with a soft hiss, its small thrusters carrying Jake toward the largest section of the destroyed ship. His helmet display showed the life signs growing stronger as he approached. 3 distinct signatures huddled together in what appeared to be an emergency compartment deep within the vessel's core. As Jake maneuvered through the twisted corridors of the wreck, his suit lights illuminated scenes of devastation. Blast holes punctured the hull in dozens of places, and the characteristic scorch marks of Vaxari energy weapons scarred every surface. Whatever cargo this ship had been carrying was long gone, along with most of its crew. "Aria, I'm reading elevated radiation levels in this section." "Confirmed. The ship's reactor is leaking. You have perhaps 20 minutes before exposure becomes dangerous, even with your suit's protection." Jake picked up his pace, following his scanner's guidance through the maze of destroyed passages. The life signs were just ahead, beyond a sealed blast door that had likely saved the young survivors' lives. The door's locking mechanism had been damaged, but Jake's cutting torch made short work of the reinforced metal. The blast door fell inward with a crash, and Jake's helmet lights illuminated the small emergency compartment beyond. 3 pairs of large, terrified eyes stared back at him from the darkness. The children, for they were clearly children despite their alien features, were huddled together in the far corner of the compartment. They appeared to be of the same species, tall and slender even at their young age, with elongated limbs and faces that held an almost ethereal beauty. Their skin had a pale, silvery tone that seemed to shimmer in Jake's lights, and their eyes were large and dark, filled with fear and exhaustion. "It's okay," Jake said softly, keeping his voice calm despite knowing they probably couldn't understand him. "I'm here to help." The oldest of the 3, a girl who appeared to be perhaps 12 in human years, stepped protectively in front of her 2 companions. She spoke in a melodious language Jake didn't recognize, but her tone was clearly defensive. "Aria, can you run a translation protocol?" "Working on it, Jake. Their language appears to be Zephyrian, one of the more obscure dialects from the core systems. It will take a few minutes to establish a proper translation matrix." Jake slowly removed his helmet, showing the children his human face. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and she spoke again, this time with less hostility in her voice. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said, then waited as Arya processed the translation. A moment later, his words emerged from his suit's speakers in the musical Zephyrian tongue. The effect was immediate. The girl's defensive posture relaxed slightly, and she responded in rapid Zephyrian. Arya translated, "She says, 'You are not Vaxari. Are you here to rescue us?'" "Yes," Jake replied, allowing Arya to translate. "But we need to hurry. This ship isn't safe." The girl nodded and turned to her companions, speaking quickly in their language. The other two, both younger girls who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, looked between Jake and their protector with wide, uncertain eyes. "She's telling them you're here to help," Arya explained. "Their names are Lyrelai, Seraphina, and Celestine. Lyrelai is the oldest. They say their father will reward you greatly for their rescue." "I don't want a reward," Jake said. "I just want to get you all to safety." As Arya translated his words, he saw something shift in Lyrelai's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. She spoke again, and Arya relayed. "She asks why you would risk your life for strangers if not for payment." Jake considered his answer carefully. In his experience, different species had different concepts of altruism, and some found human compassion difficult to understand. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. This time, all 3 girls stared at him with what could only be described as wonder. Lyrelai stepped forward and, to Jake's surprise, reached out to touch his hand. Her fingers were longer than human digits, and her touch was remarkably warm despite the cold of the compartment. She spoke in Zephyrian, and Arya translated. "She says her father told her that humans were different from other species, but she didn't understand what he meant until now." "Jake," Arya interrupted, "radiation levels are approaching the danger threshold. We need to evacuate immediately." Jake nodded and gestured for the girls to follow him. "Come on. We're getting out of here." The journey back through the wreckage was tense. The girls stayed close behind Jake, with Lyrelai helping guide her younger companions through the twisted passages. Jake's radiation detector clicked ominously as they moved through the ship's core, and he could see the growing concern in Arya's status displays. They reached the rescue pod with minutes to spare. Jake helped the 3 girls strap themselves into the passenger seats before sealing the hatch and firing the thrusters. The pod shot away from the dying ship just as its reactor finally gave up completely, sending a wave of deadly radiation through the surrounding space. Back aboard the Wanderer, Jake watched the girls examine their surroundings with obvious amazement. His ship wasn't large or luxurious, but it was clean and functional, with all the amenities needed for long-range travel. The girls seemed particularly fascinated by Arya's holographic display systems. "They've never seen a human ship before," Arya observed. "Or a human, for that matter. They're asking if all humans are as kind as you are." Jake felt a slight flush of embarrassment. "What should I tell them?" "The truth would be appropriate. That humans have the capacity for both great kindness and great cruelty, like most sentient species, but that you personally chose kindness." As Arya relayed his explanation, Jake saw Lyrelai nod thoughtfully. She spoke again, and Arya translated. "She says her father always told them that humans were special among the galaxy species, but she never understood why until today. She wants to know if you will take them home." "Of course." "Where is home?" Lyrelai's answer made both Jake and Arya pause in surprise. The name she spoke was Zephyros Prime, the capital world of the Zephyrian Collective, one of the most powerful and wealthy civilizations in the core systems. It was also thousands of light years from their current position in the Outer Rim. "That's quite a journey," Jake said carefully. "It will take weeks to reach Zephyrian space, and I'll need to stock up on supplies." Lyrelai seemed to understand his concern. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat, a credit chip bearing the royal seal of the Zephyrian Collective. Not just any royal seal, but the personal mark of the High Regent himself. She says her father will pay for all expenses, Arya translated, her voice carrying a note of shock. Jake, do you realize what this means? These aren't just ordinary Zephyrian children. They're members of the royal family. Jake studied the three girls with new eyes. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see the subtle signs of their high birth, the quality of their clothing, despite its torn and dirty condition, the way Lyrelei carried herself with unconscious authority, the protective jewelry each girl wore, which Jake now realized was probably worth more than his entire ship. Why were they on a merchant vessel? He wondered aloud. Lyrelei seemed to understand his question without translation. She spoke at length, her voice growing sad and worried. Arya provided a running translation. She says they were traveling incognito to visit their grandmother on Kepler Station. Their father thought it would be safer than using an official royal transport, which might attract pirates or political enemies. They were supposed to have a military escort, but something went wrong. The escort never showed up, and the merchant ship was left unprotected. And the Vaxari found them, Jake finished grimly. Lucky for you, they were more interested in the cargo than taking prisoners. She says it wasn't luck, Arya continued. The ship's crew hid them in the emergency compartment and gave their lives to protect them. The children heard the battle over the ship's internal communications. The crew fought bravely, but they were outgunned. Jake felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. The Vaxari were bad enough when they stuck to stealing cargo, but murdering innocent crews was another matter entirely. He'd tangled with them before, and he had no illusions about their brutality. Arya, set course for the nearest Federation station. We'll need to refuel and resupply before making the journey to Zephyros Prime. Jake, I should point out that carrying members of the Zephyrian royal family puts us at considerable risk. If their enemies learn of their survival, or if political rivals decide they're better off dead, then it's a good thing I'm not planning to advertise their presence, Jake replied. These girls have been through enough. They deserve to get home safely. As the Wanderer prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake found himself studying his unexpected passengers. Lyrelei had fallen asleep in one of the passenger chairs, her arms wrapped protectively around her younger companions. Despite their royal birth, they looked like any other children who had survived a traumatic experience, vulnerable, exhausted, and far from home. But there was something else, something Jake couldn't quite put his finger on. The way Lyrelei had spoken about her father, the careful way she'd answered his questions about their journey, there was more to this story than a simple family visit gone wrong. Jake had spent years reading people. It was an essential skill for a salvage operator dealing with clients who weren't always honest about their motives. And right now, every instinct he possessed was telling him that these three girls were at the center of something much larger and more dangerous than a random pirate attack. Arya, run a discreet search on recent political developments in the Zephyrian Collective. Focus on anything involving the royal family or the High Regent. Searching now, Jake. Though I should mention that information about Zephyrian internal affairs is often classified or restricted. Do what you can. I have a feeling we're going to need all the information we can get. As the stars shifted to the characteristic blue-white streaks of hyperspace, Jake settled into his captain's chair and tried to ignore the growing certainty that rescuing 3 alien children was about to get significantly more complicated. Behind him, Lyrelei stirred in her sleep and murmured something in Zephyrian. Arya's translation was almost too quiet to hear. Father, we're coming home. Jake hoped, for all their sakes, that home would still be there when they arrived. The Federation trading post at Nexus Station was exactly the kind of place Jake preferred for resupply runs, busy enough that 3 more passengers wouldn't attract attention, but small enough that word of their presence was unlikely to spread beyond the local gossip networks. As the Wanderer docked at one of the outer pylons, Jake watched the girls through the viewport as they got their first look at a truly multi-species environment. "There must be a dozen different species represented out there," Arya observed, tracking the various beings moving through the station's corridors. The girls seemed fascinated. Indeed, Lyrelay and her companions were pressed against the observation windows, pointing excitedly at the mixture of humans, Altarians, Keth, and other species going about their business. Jake smiled at their enthusiasm. Despite their royal upbringing, or perhaps because of it, they seemed genuinely curious about the wider galaxy. "Before we dock," Jake said, "I need to talk to them about staying on the ship." He gathered the three girls in the main cabin and waited for Arya to activate the translation protocols. "I know you're curious about the station, but it's important that you stay aboard the Wanderer while we're here. There are people who might recognize you, and that could put you in danger." Lyrelay nodded solemnly, but Jake could see the disappointment in her younger companion's eyes. Seraphina, the middle child, spoke up, and Arya translated. "She asks if all humans live on stations like this one." "Some do," Jake replied, "but humans come from a single world, just like Zephyrians. Most of us still live on planets, though we've spread out across the galaxy more than most species." "She wants to know why," Arya continued, translating Seraphina's rapid questions. Jake considered his answer carefully. How do you explain humanity's restless expansion to children who had grown up in one of the galaxy's most stable civilizations? "Humans are curious," he said finally. "We want to see what's beyond the next star, to meet new people and explore new worlds. Sometimes that gets us into trouble. But it's also how we make friends with species we never would have met otherwise." Celestine, the youngest, spoke for the first time since the rescue, her voice barely above a whisper. Arya translated. "She says her father told her that humans are the only species that will risk their lives for strangers without expecting anything in return. She asks if that's true." Jake felt that familiar discomfort with being painted as some kind of galactic saint. "Humans aren't perfect, Celestine. We can be selfish and cruel sometimes, just like anyone else. But yes, many of us believe that helping others is important, even when it costs us something." The girl's large eyes studied his face as Arya provided the translation. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "She says she wants to visit Earth someday, to see the world that creates people like you." Before Jake could respond, Arya interrupted with an alert. "Jake, I'm picking up some concerning chatter on the station's communication networks. Several ships have arrived in the past few hours asking questions about unusual salvage activities in the Outer Rim sectors." Jake's blood chilled. "What kind of questions?" "Specifically, they're asking about any ships that might have rescued survivors from the attack on the Celestial Dawn. The inquiries are being made by private contractors, not Federation authorities." "Bounty hunters," Jake muttered. "Or worse." He turned to Lyrelay. "Does your father have enemies who might want to hurt you?" The girl's expression grew troubled, and she spoke at length with obvious reluctance. Arya translated piece by piece. "She says there have been political difficulties recently. Some of the noble houses believe her father is too friendly with non-Zephyrian species, especially humans. They think the collective should remain isolated and pure. There have been protests, and some violence. And these noble houses might be behind the attack on your ship." Lyrelay's nod was barely perceptible. She continued speaking, and Arya's translation grew more alarming. "She says their journey was supposed to be secret, but someone must have leaked their travel plans. The missing military escort. She thinks it wasn't an accident. Someone made sure they would be vulnerable." Jake processed this information grimly. A political conspiracy within the Zephyrian collective, with these 3 children as targets. And now bounty hunters were actively searching for survivors of the attack. The situation was rapidly becoming more dangerous than he'd anticipated. Arya, how long until we can depart? Fuel transfer will be complete in 2 hours. I can expedite the supply loading, but it will attract attention. Do it, and see if you can access any recent news from Zephyrian space without triggering security alerts. While Arya managed the resupply process, Jake found himself studying the three girls more carefully. Now that he understood the political context, several things made more sense. The way Lyrelay spoke about her father suggested not just love, but also worry. The kind of concern a child feels when they know their parent is in danger. The expensive but understated clothing they wore was exactly what you'd choose for traveling incognito. Even their choice to visit their grandmother suddenly seemed more significant. Perhaps getting the children out of harm's way had been the real purpose of the trip. Serafina approached him while her sisters were distracted by the view of the station. Through Arya, she said, "You look troubled, Captain Morrison. Are we bringing danger to you?" Jake was struck by the maturity in her question. These weren't just pampered royal children. They understood the gravity of their situation and were concerned about the impact on others. "You're not bringing me danger," he replied. "I chose to help you, and I don't regret that choice. But I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with if I'm going to get you home safely." The girl studied his face for a moment, then made what appeared to be a decision. She spoke rapidly in Zephyrian, and Arya's translation made Jake's heart sink. "She says there's something they haven't told you about their father. He's not just a member of the royal family. He's the heir apparent to the High Regent's throne, and the High Regent is dying." The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place. A succession crisis in one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, with conservative factions opposing a progressive heir who favored closer ties with other species. The attempted assassination of his children would eliminate potential future heirs and send a clear message about the consequences of his policies. "Arya, how's that news search coming?" "I'm finding some interesting information, Jake. There have been reports of increased military activity in the Zephyrian core systems, officially described as routine training exercises. Several prominent nobles have been making public speeches about maintaining Zephyrian purity and tradition, and there are unconfirmed reports that the High Regent has been in poor health, though the palace denies this." "Any mention of the girl's father?" "Prince Regent Valion has been notably absent from public events for the past 2 weeks, since just before his daughter's supposed departure for their visit. The official explanation is that he's attending to family matters, but political observers are speculating about his silence." Jake felt a chill. If the Prince Regent was also missing, it suggested the conspiracy went deeper than just targeting his children. The entire progressive faction of the Zephyrian government might be under attack. "Jake," Arya continued, "I'm also detecting 3 ships that have been systematically checking with fuel stations and trading posts along the likely routes from the attack site to Zephyrian space. Their inquiry pattern suggests they have sophisticated tracking software and considerable resources." "How long until they get here?" "At their current search pattern, approximately 6 to 8 hours. Jake made his decision. "Prep the ship for immediate departure. We're leaving as soon as the fuel transfer is complete." He turned to find all 3 girls watching him with worried expressions. Lyrelay spoke, and Arya translated. "She asks if we're in immediate danger." Jake chose honesty. "Yes, but we're going to be smart about how we handle it. I've been running cargo through dangerous space for years, and I know how to avoid trouble. She wants to know if you're going to abandon them at a Federation facility for their own safety," Arya continued. The question caught Jake off guard. He looked at the 3 young faces staring at him with a mixture of hope and fear, and felt something twist in his chest. They'd already lost so much. Their escort, the merchant crew who died protecting them, and possibly their father as well. The last thing they needed was another abandonment. No, he said firmly. I gave you my word that I'd get you home, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. The relief in their expressions was palpable. Celestine stepped forward and, in carefully pronounced standard, said, "Thank you, Captain Jake." Jake felt his throat tighten. "You're welcome, kid." An hour later, the Wanderer was racing away from Nexus Station at maximum sublight speed. Jake had plotted a course that would take them through several hyperspace jumps, using routes known mainly to smugglers and independent operators. It would add days to their journey, but it would also make them much harder to track. As they made their first jump to hyperspace, Arya presented Jake with the results of her deeper analysis of Zephyrian political news. The picture that emerged was troubling. The conservative faction, led by a coalition of noble houses calling themselves the Purist Alliance, had been gaining power in the Zephyrian Senate. They opposed Prince Regent Valian's policies of technological exchange with other species and his proposals for increased trade and cultural cooperation. The timing of this attack is particularly significant, Arya observed. If the High Regent dies, while the Prince Regent and his heirs are missing or dead, the succession would fall to the Senate to decide. With the Purist Alliance controlling a significant block of votes, they could install their own candidate as the new High Regent. A coup disguised as a succession crisis, Jake muttered. And 3 little girls are the only thing standing between them and complete control. Actually, Jake, there's something else you should see. Arya displayed a series of news reports from the past 24 hours. There have been scattered reports of violence against non-Zephyrian businesses and residents in several collective systems. The attacks are being blamed on spontaneous demonstrations by concerned citizens, but the pattern suggests coordination. Jake studied the reports with growing alarm. The violence was escalating quickly, and it was clearly targeted at species that had benefited from Prince Regent Valian's policies: humans, Altarians, and other allies of the progressive faction. They're not just planning a coup, he realized. They're planning a purge. Anyone who supported the Prince Regent's policies is going to be a target. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If the Purist Alliance succeeded, it wouldn't just mean the end of progressive leadership in the Zephyrian collective. It could spark a wider conflict as other species reacted to the persecution of their citizens and the disruption of trade relationships. The entire balance of power in this sector of the galaxy could shift. And at the center of it all were 3 frightened children who had already lost everything except each other. Jake found the girls in the ship's small recreation area, where Arya had been teaching them a human card game to help pass the time. They looked up as he entered, and he could see in their eyes that they understood the gravity of their situation, even if they didn't know all the details. "We need to talk," he said, settling into a chair across from them. "I've learned more about what's happening in your home, and I think you deserve to know the truth." He explained what Arya had discovered, keeping his language simple but not talking down to them. They listened with the serious attention of children who had been forced to grow up too quickly, asking occasional questions that demonstrated their understanding of political complexity. When he finished, Lyrelai spoke at length, her voice heavy with sadness. Arya translated. She says they've known for months that their father was in danger. The protests against his policies have been growing more violent, and there have been several attempts to harm people close to him. She says he sent them away not just to visit their grandmother, but to keep them safe while he dealt with the crisis. And now he might be in the hands of his enemies, Jake said gently. Lyrelai nodded, tears beginning to form in her large eyes. She continued speaking, and Arya's translation revealed the true depth of their situation. She says that if their father is dead, they are the only legitimate heirs to the throne. The Purist Alliance will never stop hunting them because as long as they live, they represent a threat to any illegitimate government. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. These weren't just 3 children he was rescuing. They were potentially the rightful rulers of one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, and their survival could determine the fate of millions of beings across dozens of worlds. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I can try to get you to a Federation world where you'll be safe, or I can take you home to fight for your father's legacy, but the choice has to be yours." The 3 girls looked at each other, communicating in the wordless way that close siblings often did. Finally, Lyrelei spoke, and her words carried a determination that reminded Jake powerfully of her royal heritage. "She says they want to go home. Their people need them, and they won't abandon their father or their duty to the collective." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. In that moment, he saw not just the scared children he'd rescued, but the leaders they would someday become if they lived long enough to claim their birthright. "Then we go home," he said, "but we're going to be smart about it. Area, start working on a plan to get us into Zephyrian space without being detected, and see if you can find any allies we might have once we get there." As the Wanderer raced through hyperspace toward an uncertain future, Jake found himself thinking about the choice the girls had made. They could have chosen safety, chosen to let others fight their battles while they lived in comfortable exile. Instead, they had chosen duty and courage over safety and ease. It was, Jake realized, a very human choice. And perhaps that was what Prince Regent Valion had seen in humanity that made him such a strong advocate for cooperation between species. The recognition that some values, like courage and compassion and the willingness to sacrifice for others, transcended species boundaries. If they could get these 3 remarkable young beings home safely, maybe those values would have a chance to shape the future of the galaxy. The outer edges of the Zephyrian collective were marked not by borders or warning beacons, but by a subtle shift in the very fabric of space itself. Ancient Zephyrian technology had long ago established quantum markers that could detect and track any vessel entering their territory, making stealth entry virtually impossible. Or so most people believed. Jake Morrison was not most people. "Area, activate the resonance dampeners and bring our quantum signature down to background levels," he ordered as the Wanderer approached the invisible boundary of Zephyrian space. "Dampeners active, Jake. We should appear as little more than cosmic debris to their sensor networks, though I should mention that this technology is highly illegal in collective space." "So is assassinating members of the royal family," Jake replied grimly. "I think we can live with a little contraband scanner tech." Behind him, the 3 Zephyrian girls watched the procedure with fascination. Over the past week of their journey, they had grown increasingly comfortable aboard the Wanderer, and Jake had found himself enjoying their curiosity about human technology and customs. Lyrelei, in particular, had shown an aptitude for understanding the ship's systems that reminded Jake of himself at that age. "Captain Jake," Seraphina said in carefully practiced standard, "how did you learn to hide from our sensors? Our military believes their detection grid is perfect." Jake smiled. "Your military is very good, but they think like soldiers. I learned to think like a smuggler." He paused, considering how much to explain. "The quantum markers work by detecting specific energy signatures. If you can mask those signatures and match your ship's output to the background radiation of space, you become effectively invisible." "She asks if you learned this technique from other humans?" Area translated as Lyrelei spoke up. "Partly. But I also learned it from a Keth engineer who taught me that every security system has weaknesses. You just have to be creative about finding them." As they slipped undetected through the outer sensor grid, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in human adaptability. While other species had developed impressive technologies, humans had become masters at finding ways around those technologies when necessary. It was a skill that had served them well in their rapid expansion across the galaxy. "Jake," I'm picking up significant military traffic in the inner systems, Arya reported. Fleet movements, encrypted communications, and what appears to be a complete communications blackout around Zephyros Prime itself. A military coup, Jake muttered. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Celestine spoke up, her voice trembling with worry, and Arya translated. She asks if this means their father is dead. Jake turned to look at the three girls, seeing the fear and grief in their eyes. We don't know that yet. Let's get closer and see what we can find out. The journey deeper into collective space revealed a civilization in the grip of systematic oppression. Military checkpoints had been established at every major hyperspace junction, and Arya intercepted communications indicating mass arrests of anyone associated with Prince Regent Valian's administration. The violence against non-Zephyrian residents had escalated dramatically, with entire districts of alien-populated cities being evacuated for their own protection. It's a classic authoritarian playbook, Jake observed as they reviewed the intelligence Arya had gathered. Create chaos, blame external influences, then consolidate power under the guise of restoring order. She says this is not the collective she grew up in, Arya translated Lyrale's response. Her father always taught them that Zephyros was strong because it welcomed different perspectives and ideas. This is the opposite of everything he believed. As they approached the inner systems, Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of heading directly for Zephyros Prime, he changed course for Sanctuary Station, a massive space habitat that had served as the diplomatic and cultural center of the collective. If there were any surviving members of the progressive faction, that's where they would have gone to ground. Jake, I should point out that approaching Sanctuary Station is extremely dangerous, Arya warned. If the girls are recognized, then we make sure they're not recognized, Jake replied. Arya, can you access your archives on Zephyrian culture and customs? Of course. What do you need? Information about traditional mourning practices. If the official story is that the Prince Regent's family died in the attack, then 3 young Zephyrians in mourning dress shouldn't attract unusual attention. It was a calculated risk, but Jake's experience with human psychology suggested it would work. People tended to avoid looking too closely at those in obvious grief, and the formal mourning clothes would obscure the girls' distinctive features. The plan worked better than Jake had dared hope. Docked at Sanctuary Station as a routine supply transport, the Wanderer attracted no special attention among the dozens of other vessels. Jake and the girls, dressed in the dark robes and veils of Zephyrian mourning tradition, moved through the station's corridors like ghosts. It was Lyralai who spotted him first, a figure in an expensive suit trying very hard to look like an ordinary businessman. She gripped Jake's arm and whispered something urgent in Zephyrian. She says that man is Lord Commander Thyson, head of her father's personal guard, Arya translated through Jake's earpiece. If he's here and alive, it means some of the loyalist forces survived. Jake followed the man at a discreet distance, watching as he entered what appeared to be a legitimate commercial establishment, a shop selling rare books and manuscripts. But Jake's trained eye caught the subtle security measures and the fact that several customers seemed to be conducting business that had nothing to do with literature. A safe house, he murmured to himself. Getting inside required all of Jake's skills as a negotiator and, frankly, a fair amount of luck. The proprietor, an elderly Zephyrian scholar named Kelvoran, was initially suspicious of the human stranger and his veiled companions. But when Lyralai removed her mourning veil and revealed her face, the old man's expression shifted from suspicion to shock to joy so quickly that Jake thought he might collapse. Within minutes, they were in a hidden chamber beneath the shop, surrounded by perhaps 24 Zephyrians who had risked everything to remain loyal to Prince Regent Valian. Lord Commander Thyson, a tall, distinguished Zephyrian with the bearing of a career military officer, listened in amazement as Jake recounted the rescue and their journey to Zephyros. "Captain Morrison," Thyssen said in accented but fluent Standard, "you have given us a gift beyond price. We feared the Prince Regent's line had ended forever." "Where is their father?" Jake asked directly. "Is he alive?" Thyssen's expression grew grim. "Prince Regent Valian is alive, but he is a prisoner of the Purist Alliance. They are holding him in the Palace of Contemplation on Zephyros Prime, using him as leverage to legitimize their coup. As long as he lives, they can claim they are acting on his behalf. But we believe they intend to arrange his suicide once their position is secured. Can he be rescued? The palace is heavily guarded, and the Alliance has deployed their most advanced security systems. It would take a miracle to reach him." Thyssen paused, studying Jake with new interest. Or perhaps the ingenuity of a human who has already accomplished the impossible once. Before Jake could respond, Lyrelay stepped forward and spoke with quiet authority that reminded everyone in the room of her royal heritage. Thyssen listened respectfully, then translated for Jake's benefit. "Princess Lyrelay says that she and her sisters are prepared to surrender themselves to the Alliance in exchange for their father's freedom." "Absolutely not," Jake said immediately. "They'll just kill all of you." "She says the Alliance cannot execute the legitimate heirs publicly without causing a rebellion. They would have to stage accidents or disappearances, which takes time. Time that might allow loyal forces to organize resistance." Jake shook his head. "There has to be another way." It was then that Kelvoran, the elderly bookseller, spoke up with the most important words anyone had said since their arrival. "Captain Morrison, there is something about Prince Regent Valian that even his enemies do not know. Something that could change everything." The room fell silent as the old scholar continued. "I was the prince's tutor when he was young, and later served as his advisor on xenological matters. 40 years ago, when he was barely older than Princess Lyrelay is now, the prince was gravely injured in a shuttle accident on a remote world. He was found and saved by a human exploration team, one of the first official contacts between our species." Jake felt a chill of premonition. What happened? The human medical technology was more advanced than ours in certain areas. To save his life, the medical team had to perform extensive biological modifications. Prince Regent Valian has been living with human-derived genetic enhancements for 4 decades. His enhanced cognitive abilities, his unusual longevity, his deeper understanding of other species, all of it stems from that accident. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. He's part human. Genetically, yes, it's not something that could be easily detected, and we've kept it secret to protect him from those who would see it as contamination of the royal bloodline. But if the Purist Alliance discovered the truth, they'd kill him immediately," Thyssen finished. "The irony is that the man they see as too sympathetic to alien influences is himself partially alien by their standards." Jake looked at the 3 girls, seeing them in a new light. Their unusual intelligence, their quick adaptation to human technology, their instinctive understanding of concepts like altruism and sacrifice. They had inherited more than just their father's progressive politics. But this also gives us an advantage, Jake realized. If the prince has human genetic modifications, then human medical scanners might be able to locate him even through Zephyrian security systems. Our technologies are compatible in ways the Alliance won't expect. What followed was perhaps the most audacious rescue plan in the history of interspecies cooperation. Using the Wanderer's illegal scanning equipment, they would locate Prince Regent Valian within the Palace of Contemplation. Jake would infiltrate the facility using a combination of human stealth technology and Zephyrian insider knowledge provided by the Loyalists. Meanwhile, the girls would use their royal access codes to create a distraction by broadcasting a message throughout the collective, revealing that they were alive and calling on the people to reject the Alliance's coup. "It's insane," Thyssen admitted. But it might actually work. The Alliance has grown overconfident, and they won't expect an attack from someone using human technology they don't understand. The infiltration of the Palace of Contemplation was everything Jake had expected, and worse. The facility was a maze of ancient architecture combined with cutting-edge security systems, patrolled by Alliance guards who had orders to shoot first and ask questions later. But Jake's experience in boarding derelict ships and navigating hostile environments served him well, and the human-designed stealth suit he wore made him effectively invisible to Zephyrian sensors. He found Prince Regent Valian in a heavily guarded cell deep within the palace, and Jake's first sight of the man explained everything about his daughter's exceptional character. Despite weeks of imprisonment and obvious mistreatment, the prince carried himself with dignity and quiet strength. When Jake appeared seemingly out of nowhere, Valian's only reaction was a slight smile. "I was wondering when someone would come," the prince said in perfect standard, "though I admit I expected it to be a Zephyrian operative, not a human." "Your daughters sent me," Jake replied, working quickly to disable the cell's locking mechanism. "They're safe, and they're calling on your people to reject the coup as we speak." Valian's composure finally cracked, tears of relief streaming down his face. "My girls are alive, but the reports said—" "The reports were wrong. They're remarkable young women, Your Highness. They've been through hell, but they never stopped believing in you or in the values you taught them." As alarms began sounding throughout the palace, Jake and the prince made their escape through corridors filled with confused guards and loyal servants who had been waiting for just such a moment. The distraction created by the girls' broadcast was working. The Alliance forces were divided between pursuing the escapees and trying to contain the growing unrest throughout the collective. The reunion between Prince Regent Valian and his daughters aboard the Wanderer was everything Jake had hoped it would be. The three girls threw themselves into their father's arms with joy and relief that reminded Jake of the essential truth beneath all the political maneuvering. This was a family that had been torn apart and was now whole again. "Captain Morrison," the prince said, extending his hand to Jake, "I understand I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You risked your life for strangers and helped save not just my family, but potentially my entire civilization." "I did what anyone should have done," Jake replied, though he accepted the handshake. "No," Valian said firmly. "You did what humans do. You saw people in need and helped them, regardless of the cost to yourself. It's why I've always believed that humanity represents the best hope for the galaxy's future. Not because you're perfect, but because you understand that we're all connected, all responsible for each other's welfare." As the Wanderer raced toward the edge of Zephyrian space, carrying the royal family to safety while loyalist forces regrouped and the Purist Alliance's power structure crumbled in the face of popular uprising, Jake found himself thinking about the deeper meaning of what had happened. The prince's secret, his partial human heritage, had remained hidden for decades, but it had shaped everything about his rule and his vision for the future. In trying to destroy what they saw as alien contamination of their pure society, the Purists had been unknowingly attacking the very thing that made their leader so effective and beloved. "Area," Jake said as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. "What's the current status of the uprising in the collective?" "Widespread and growing, Jake. It appears the revelation that the royal family survived has triggered exactly the kind of popular rebellion the Alliance was trying to prevent. Early reports suggest several Alliance leaders have been arrested by their own security forces. And the attacks on non-Zephyrian residents? Ending rapidly. The prince's broadcast condemning the violence seems to have turned public opinion decisively against the Purists." Jake nodded with satisfaction. Sometimes the good guys actually won, though it usually required a lot of luck and the courage of people willing to risk everything for what was right. As they entered hyperspace bound for Federation territory, where the royal family would be safe, While the political situation stabilized, Princess Lyrelai approached Jake at the captain's station. "Captain Morrison," she said in carefully practiced standard, "my father says you are a hero, but I think you are something more important. You are a friend." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're pretty special yourself, Princess. All three of you are going to be amazing leaders someday." She says when that day comes, she hopes humans and Zephyrians will be close allies, Arya translated as Lyrelai continued in her native language. She says her father's vision of cooperation between species isn't just political, it's personal. The best of each species working together to create something better than either could achieve alone. Jake looked around the bridge of his ship. A human vessel carrying a Zephyrian royal family to safety, protected by illegal technology, and guided by an AI with a personality drawn from the best aspects of human nature. It was, he realized, exactly the kind of cooperation the Prince Regent had envisioned, and exactly the kind of future worth fighting for. "Tell her," Jake said. "That sounds like a pretty good future to me." As the stars wheeled past the viewport and the Wanderer carried its precious cargo toward a new tomorrow, Jake Morrison smiled and settled back in his captain's chair. Sometimes being human, with all the curiosity, stubbornness, and compassion that entailed, was exactly what the galaxy needed. And sometimes rescuing 3 lost children turned out to be the first step toward saving an entire civilization.